Well, I think that, watchdog journalism is sort of unique in of itself, and I don't worry about watchdog journalism so well. I think it's just the everyday journalism that we do is really seeded with so many bad habits that it's sort of alarming when you start to parse it. I mean, we really participate in a lot of scorecard journalism every day. Who's up or down today? Is it this party? Is it that party? Is it the president or is it the Congress, in our case, or Parliament? Is it the school board or is it teachers union? I mean, we're always sort of pitting one side against another, which it really is not the way citizens view the issue. They don't keep score. It's only journalists who have this great scorecard in the sky that we're always keeping score on, and it's not a very effective model. I think that the whole idea of it isn't a news story. I mean, if you send a reporter to a meeting where everybody agrees, they're very likely to come back and tell their editor there's no story there, right? And there could be an enormous amount of consensus to build, the biggest community-changing infrastructure in the world, but there's no story there if everybody's agreeing on it. We do not, as a profession, we do not know how to validate consensus. We really don't have templates in journalism for consensus. That's not what we do. Our job is to validate conflict. And it's when you think about it, it's very damaging to society at large. It's very damaging to communities in a small way. I think our definitions of balance are always to look at a balanced story by if there's a pro, you get the con. If there's a con, you get the pro. We tend to report on extreme points of view. Balance is always in the middle. It's not at the extremes, but we don't do the middle because that's a little too messy and mussy, swampland. And so we prefer not to deal with the middle at all. We prefer to deal with the extremes. And so we tend to validate extreme points of view more than we validate where most of the people in our community live, which is in that great mushy middle where the conflict is not an external conflict, but it's an internal conflict. It's a conflict of values, Gee, I'd really like to support this and I'd like to support that, but there's only so much money for this and I don't know what to do, but wow, it's a tough call, or I think that whole world of internal conflict that we're wrestling with all the time, whether it's haves or have-nots, whether it's levels of corporate compensation between those who don't get anything. I mean, we're always, it's one of a values conflict, a conflict of values. It's actually much more meaningful to our readers than a conflict of personalities. And again, we don't do a good job of rendering that as journalism. It's difficult to write, and it's messier to write. It's more the ambivalence you would see in a novel than in a story when you can wrestle with that kind of conflict that I think is really crucial to a lot of the problems, the social problems especially, that we're dealing with in so many of our nations. So, I think this whole he said, she said kind of false equilibrium in journalism is another problem. We don't tell people what's true. We sort of engage in this exercise of quoting people even if we know they're lying just because we needed to get the other side. And so there's just a lot of stuff going on there that is not very useful.
I'm worried about the preservation of quality and investigative reporting in the face of the current transition from print to online. I'm worried because I've questioned the capacity of online revenue to pay for projects that take months or sometimes years to do. It's highly doubtful that any of the for-profit models, paywalls, subscriptions, whatever, will enhance the level of quality journalism in Australia. Does anyone here believe it will? It worries me that people looking at future models rarely talk about quality journalism at a time when spin and distortion are worse than ever and the need for unhurried, well-researched and relevant journalism is needed more than ever. I believe having an investigative watchdog news media is in the public interest. So my talk really is about how to preserve the best elements of the old model at a time when media companies are looking at ways of cutting costs and PR is winning. PR is winning. no doubt about that. We give money all the time as Australians to victims of disasters. We're good at it. Should pat ourselves on the shoulder. But would we give money to enhance scrutiny of government and its agencies? Would we donate to free speech causes? Do we donate to enhance democracy in this country? Would we donate the way the Americans and others do to non-profit investigative centres that hold the powerful to account? To centres that aggressively scrutinise government agencies, probe systemic problems, issues in health, education, welfare systems, and that expose corruption? I'd like to think so, but I'm not sure. I asked on Twitter this morning whether we need someone like Herbert Sandler. For those of you who don't know, he's an American former banker, a billionaire, who sold his bank to a bigger bank. He now gives ProPublica $10 million a year and is committed to do so for 3 years. It's $30 million US, just to do investigative journalism. I was at a conference in Lillehammer, nice place for a conference up in Norway, investigative conference. And one of my mates, Dave Kaplan, who studied non-profit centres globally, was up on stage talking. Other than the US, there were centres doing investigative journalism, teaching it or funding investigative journalism in Sweden and Denmark, as well as an amazingly brave centre in the Philippines. Then there was a centre in Armenia, Mexico, Romania, Brazil, with 1,000 members, Peru, Venezuela, Africa and Chile, and Canada. And I remember sitting there thinking, what's the matter with Australia? What's happening? Why are these centres being set up globally? Was there something wrong or something different happening in Australia? Well, I guess we've got the ABC, does a lot of investigative journalism, publicly funded, non-profit. In Sydney, we've got, connected to UTS, the Centre for Independent Journalism, and here Meg and Melissa Sweet have recently established the Public Interest Foundation, Public Interest Journalism Foundation and Yukon News, which is great. I'm involved with that and I wish it all the best. Not necessarily an outfit, however, that's going to do lengthy, expensive investigations, although I hope they do some. Anyway, Kaplan, my friend, continued up in Lillehammer. There was a forum for African investigative reporters, then the London-based Centre for Investigative Journalism, and then one in the Balkans as well. The Middle East, Germany, Bulgaria, Colombia, Nigeria, Siberia. Not Siberia, Serbia. Close. A total of 43 centres established. 2 years later, which was earlier this year, at the next meeting of the Global Investigative Journalists Conference in Geneva, Norway to Geneva, not bad, Kaplan delivered much the same speech but added several investigative centres attached to universities. The Schuster Centre at Brandeis University, Sabile Centre at Columbia, investigative workshop at American University. I haven't explored this fully, but what I think we need to do, and maybe some independents floating around might look at this, is try to convince the government to introduce tax deductibility for centres such as this, because I think I take whatever my colleagues here said. I think both the Australian, the Age, Fairfax and News do investigative journalism. I'm not deriding the work that they do at all, but I think the more of these centres or centres that are established that do this type of work, sometimes in collaboration with mainstream media, the healthier our democracy.
What's most important is you, not us, and that is that I think you really should vote with your eyes and with your hands and with your purchases. You should help determine this content. One caveat to that view, of course, for the Age is that we need to have a leadership position. The Age is a particular type of media organisation. It has an ability to take a leadership position for this community, for the country, internationally sometimes. because nobody else will, and because we think it's important. Now, that's through our editorials and sometimes through campaigning journalism on issues. Some of that is missing in the new world. Some of that's not quite there. And it's partly because it takes a lot of money. The very best journalism is expensive. And one other point to make there too is something that I worry about, and it's now apparent almost in every website, is what's euphemistically called weather-vane journalism. People are wanting it, so you give them more. They want it, give them more. And it leads to a risk of people talking to themselves about things they like talking about and not talking about things that challenge them, that are different, that have serendipity attached to them, that really matter. And this is something that at the Age I really worry about, and I try to put things in the paper that are new and different and have real meaning and are not necessarily part of the weather vane of journalism.
And I want to make one point very, very clear as we sit here and hypothesise about the future in a rapidly changing media landscape. And believe me, I've been to enough of these conferences and read enough and seen enough on YouTube, etc. We can bang on about this stuff. But there's one thing that often gets overlooked, and overlooked to, I think, our detriment, is the role and the value of journalists will never, ever change. A journalist's job is to engage, enlighten, educate, expose and entertain. It always has been and it always will be. Doesn't matter if you're working for the ABC, the Herald Sun, the Age or Crikey. The mission statement remains the same. Sure, technology driving change and Paul laid out some of that stuff which I won't go into. It's changing the way stories are packaged and presented. We use tools such as video, hyperlinks, interactive graphics. Often this approach has to be different for each platform. It's moving at warp speed. It's creating a need for new roles and new skills in the newsroom. It's even changing the way newsrooms are designed. Who sits next to where, what time they come to work. Technology is meaning, or is meant, present tense and future. Our journalists have had to become more creative and way more agile. And to exploit this technology, they've had to work closely with what we in New Zealand have called technologists, those who bring the stories and pictures and videos to life in an engaging form.
If we're really going to make the most of the opportunities that are ahead of us, we need to all embrace the fact that audiences now have a range of sources, and that's a fantastic thing for organisations like ours. We know that people are getting their information from a range of sources. They're engaging with it, they're comparing it, and when they like it, and sometimes when they don't like it, they share it. And for the ABC, that now means that we're tapping into new audiences, people that we might not have had access to before. I think that greater choice in relation to information certainly poses some challenges for us. And to a certain extent, there are parts of the audience that certainly are attracted to sites and to information that reinforces their own mindset. But there's also a huge space out there for those who want to exchange ideas and have a diversity of opinion. And that's certainly where the ABC is. The free flow of information, I think, has been empowering for the audience and for media organisations, but I also think it's highlighted the benefits of a formal news structure in supporting quality journalism, legal, ethical and editorial frameworks, and very, very clear standards. I think the role of journalism, I agree with Bill, remains the same. It is to inform, to engage, to stimulate discussion and debate on issues of national significance and social significance. And, I know it's the buzzword, but really to curate a range of ideas and opinions. And I think that the way we practice journalism and the value of journalism has and is changing. For the ABC, that certainly means a change in the relationship with the audience. I think at the previous session we talked about the fact that we had a very one-way conversation with our audiences in the past, whereby we delivered news and audiences consumed our news. Now we see the opportunities in making sure that it's not a one-way conversation, that we are very engaged with our audiences.
It's not about the numbers either. I know there's, once again, going back to fascination with eyeballs. But it's not really about the numbers. I think we all need to understand influence. Someone might have 10,000 followers on Twitter. Someone might have 500, but the 500 might be a lot more influential. So never underestimate the influence of individuals living in your neighbourhood now, because you don't know how many people they can touch and how much influence they can have. Two more, the 5-minute news cycle, probably being a little bit flippant, probably close to the 15-minute news cycle. 24 hours is a long time in cyberspace, as we've found out. But just this brought home yesterday with that, and it was in the newspapers, I did read it, it was about the Kookaburra song, and the school principal got rid of the word gay, and Kookaburra sits in the old gum tree, I'm not going to sing it for you. And within no time, that was all over the media, all over blogs and media, all around the world. And I had coffee with a bloke in the afternoon. He was saying he found out about it from a woman who he follows on Twitter. She's from America. She's got a major blog with 1.5 million readers. So what one principal at a school in suburban Melbourne says and does something, and all of a sudden it's around the world. And that's pretty scary stuff. But it means that it's moved so quickly, and sometimes if the news organisations aren't plugged into Twitter and aren't plugged into the online world, they're going to struggle with getting that news. And we're seeing lots more journalists now who are on Twitter and who are now plugged into the online world, which is good to see, because they're now seeing how quickly those stories can move, and they can actually get stories from Twitter, from the people first, and then write about it probably with more analysis and in-depth.
$500 years ago, and for the past 500 years, really since Gutenberg, the entire media business model has been built on the concept of scarcity of content and scarcity of distribution. And it's really quite easy to understand how you can make a lot of money when you're one of a handful of people delivering content and you control the distribution as well. And you know, those small number of companies built very big media empires as a result. But as John pointed out, technology has completely fragmented that model. And if there's any one word that I use to describe media today, it's fragmentation. I think most people would agree with that. So if you think about it, and that fragmentation has happened to audiences, it's happened to content, and it's happened to distribution. So it is, in fact, a completely new model, and the old model of a handful of people controlling distribution and content to a broadly amorphous, undifferentiated audience, that is fundamentally what's changed. If you think about it, even as few as 15 years ago, if you wanted to get your news, you got it from the newspaper in the morning, from radio on the hour, or from TV at 6 o'clock. Maybe from the neighbor across the back fence who was telling you who was messing around in the neighborhood. Today, news is everywhere we look. So we've gone from high concentration of media to completely fragmented distribution. And in the old days, people came to you because they had to. Today, they come to you, if they do, because they want to. And that's a very fundamental change, and really changes the dynamics of a media company and its audience. So journalists will have to become more specialized, in my view, in terms of their content and their expertise in content, but they will have to become more general in their ability to be multimedia storytellers. And you know, you see that very clearly in the amount of video that is being delivered over news sites online. Today, Fairfax Digital delivers 12 million video downloads every month. And we produce over 1,200 video files, video clips, ourselves internally every month. So Fairfax Online, Fairfax Digital, is one of the largest producers of video content in all of Australia. And of course, we rely on our journalists, deeply rely on our journalists, to deliver that content for us. So from a content standpoint, looking forward, the things that companies like News and Fairfax and other well-established, high-trust, high-brand value companies can deliver is actually, in a very chaotic world, the ability to separate the wheat from the chaff. And if we do that well, I think that our content will always be a safe haven for independent, high-quality, trusted